From failure to successful entrepreneur, how I faced my family and overcame all obstacles. I never forgot that constant feeling of being invisible inside my own home. Every conversation, every compliment, every emotional investment seemed to be directed solely at my sister. I was there, breathing, living, but no one seemed to notice. The smiles, the words of encouragement, the looks of pride, all of it was directed at her, as if I were just a shadow, someone existing to fill an empty space. Growing up as Plan B is more painful than it seems. You learn early on to hide, to swallow frustrations, and to accept that your achievements will never shine as brightly as others. It's strange how silence can be so loud, how the lack of recognition can erode self-esteem, undermine confidence, and transform every personal victory into something almost meaningless. I tried to convince myself I didn't need approval, but the truth is, it hurts when those who should believe in you don't. At that time, I was working as a freelance programmer, a career that brought me passion but little security. I spent sleepless nights writing lines of code, solving problems, building projects that only I saw as valuable. To my family, this was irrelevant. There was no stability, no convincing degree, no prestige. Every question about when are you going to get a real job felt like a sharp knife piercing my chest. I tried to smile, hide it, convince myself it didn't affect me, but inside, frustration built up. It was hard to believe that despite my efforts, I wasn't enough to be celebrated or recognized. The feeling of being constantly underestimated left me anxious, frustrated, and often wanting to give up. My sister was always seen as the star of the family, and me, always the shadow no one noticed. Life ran on two parallel tracks, hers full of praise, parties, achievements, and approval. Mine silent, invisible, with no room to shine. I watched from afar, feeling a mixture of pride and frustration. Inside, I wondered if I would ever have room for my own achievements, if my efforts would ever be recognized. The problem wasn't her competence, but the way everything I did was devalued. I learned to live with the constant comparison, a weight that grew daily and seemed impossible to overcome without rebelling against my own heart. I spent my days trying to prove something no one seemed to want to see. I didn't want to compete, but I also didn't want to be invisible. I often found myself wondering, will my life ever have value to them? I felt I needed to prove something concrete, something that would give me the right to fully exist in my own family. Every small victory I achieved in my projects seemed to vanish before their eyes, swallowed up by the narrative of the perfect daughter. I tried to focus on what I could control, my work, my learning, but the emotional pressure was constant and overwhelming. It was in this scenario of invisibility and devaluation that my story began to change, even without me realizing it at the time. I still didn't know who I was outside my sister's shadow, but I felt a growing need to prove my worth, not to humiliate anyone, but to finally believe in myself. I still didn't introduce myself, didn't tell my story. I was just trying to survive emotionally, taking deep breaths each day and trying to pick up the pieces of my shattered self-esteem. Little did I know that soon everything would change, and that the silence that was eating away at me would become the driving force behind my breakthrough. It was on those nights when everything seemed overwhelming that I truly began to feel the weight of invisibility. I dedicated myself to my projects, solving complex problems, but no one saw it. Sometimes even my parents looked at me as if I were wasting their time. Samantha, my mother, always smiling at my sister, rarely gave me more than a half-hearted greeting. Jose, my father, seemed only to see her. Success, celebrating Alicia's every victory while ignoring my own small achievements. I felt a tightness in my chest that wouldn't go away, a mixture of frustration, anger, and sadness. It was like living in a house full of people, but being completely alone. And yet, I kept going, because giving up would mean confirming what they always insinuated, that I was worthless. Every line of code, every client I won alone, was a silent effort to prove to myself that there was something greater within me, something that didn't depend on external approval. Things began to get even more complicated when a public issue hit my sister. Alicia was embroiled in a professional scandal, and suddenly all the spotlight that had previously favored her began to turn against her. What shocked me wasn't the situation itself, but how my family reacted. Instead of realizing that each person must face their own consequences, they turned their gaze on me, accusing me of sabotaging their career. Jose and Samantha, who had always ignored me, now judged me without proof, with a rage that left me perplexed. I felt for the first time the true weight of injustice. It wasn't just the frustration of years of invisibility, but a direct attack on my integrity. I was surrounded, alone, and for the first time, I had to fight not only for recognition, but for my own defense. The most tense moment came when I realized my entire world could crumble. Receiving unfair accusations from people who should have supported me was devastating. I felt betrayed, as if all my effort and dedication had been deliberately ignored. Anger, mixed with fear, consumed me. I didn't know how to prove my innocence. It was like being trapped in an emotional storm, with no one to hold my hand. And most cruelly, society itself seemed ready to believe my sister's words, as if my story were worthless. I felt tiny, powerless, and the urge to give up was overwhelming. In those moments, I considered dropping everything, running, away, disappearing. But something inside me refused to accept defeat. A small thread of determination began to form, fragile but resilient, like a flame that refuses to be extinguished by the wind. It was at this point that I began to realize something essential. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone but myself. All the lonely nights, all the contempt and ignorance I received from my family became fuel for my strength. I began organizing evidence, project records, contracts, messages, everything that could demonstrate my integrity. Each document I collected was a small victory, a concrete step toward freedom. The tension was still intense, but I felt that for the first time I had control over something. I was transforming from a silent victim into someone who could fight for her own truth, and this gave me a sense of power I had never felt before. At the same time, my professional life began to take on new dimensions. As I faced the accusations, I realized I could use my story to my advantage. I demonstrated to clients my ability to solve complex problems under pressure, my ethics, and my dedication. And suddenly, small projects began to turn into larger opportunities. I was still emotionally wounded, but the strength I was building internally was beginning to reflect externally. I realized that the years of contempt I'd received could be the engine of my liberation. It was a mixed feeling: fear, anger, hope, and courage. For the first time, I felt that if I could overcome this challenge, my life would never be the same again. The court hearing was the most intense moment of my life up to that point. I had never felt so vulnerable and yet so determined. Every look from my family seemed to weigh a ton. Alicia, my sister, stared at me with that mixture of arrogance and contempt I knew so well. My parents, Jose and Samantha, hung on her every word as if it were the absolute truth. Sitting there, with all the evidence organized, I felt my heart race, my palms sweat, but at the same time a clarity I had never known. I knew I was doing the right thing. For the first time I was fighting not just to be seen, but to protect my own dignity. Every argument I presented, every document I showed, was like tearing bricks from a wall of judgment and misunderstandings that had been building around me for years. During that process, every detail felt like a battle. The psychological pressure was immense. I saw my sister distorting facts, trying to manipulate the narrative, and the feeling of injustice cut me deeply. But at the same time, I realized that my preparation gave me strength. I was no longer alone. Self-confidence became my shield. I remembered all the sleepless nights, all the projects I'd undertaken out of love and passion, and realized that all the pain I'd endured had prepared me for that moment. It was ironic. Years of neglect and invisibility had shaped me into the person capable of facing that challenge without breaking. There were moments, even during the trial, when I felt like giving up. The fear of losing, of seeing my life destroyed by unjust accusations, almost paralyzed me, but something inside me refused to give in. I took a deep breath, focused on the evidence, the messages, the contracts, the concrete proof that I had never done anything wrong. Every word I said, every document I presented was a silent affirmation of who I truly was. And finally, when the judge declared my innocence, I felt a mixture of relief and triumph that I will never forget. The victory was not just legal, it was emotional, spiritual, concrete proof that I could indeed overcome years of contempt and injustice. After the trial, my life began to transform in practical and immediate ways. My story began to circulate among clients and colleagues, demonstrating not only my skills, but also my resilience. The silent reputation I had built over the years began to be recognized, and opportunities arose like never before. The feeling of finally being seen and valued was indescribable. But more importantly, I realized that the approval of others, which I had always sought from my family, was no longer necessary. I had concrete proof of my competence, but above all, I had confidence in myself. It was during this period that I truly presented myself to the world, not as the invisible son or Plan B, but as Rodrigo, someone capable of facing injustice, rising up, and carving out his own space. The pain was still there, but transformed into strength. I realized that true victory wasn't humiliating those who despised me, but proving that my life had value in and of itself. Every step I took, every project I delivered was a reaffirmation of what I'd always known but never had the courage to declare, that my dignity and my hard work matter and that no one can take that away from me. After my court victory, I realized my life would never be the same. The confidence I had built over years of silent struggle was finally turning into concrete actions. Clients began seeking me out, not only for my work, but also for my story of overcoming obstacles. Each project I delivered became an opportunity to show that my worth didn't depend on my family's approval. I finally understood that true validation came from within, from constant effort, dedication, and the courage to keep going even when no one believed in me. Every signed contract, every accolade received was a reminder that my choices had meaning, and that my journey, even if silent, was solid and worthy. During this period, a sense of emotional freedom began to emerge. I no longer needed to justify my actions, no longer needed to seek Jose or Samantha's approval. Their presence in my life became neutral because I finally realized that their loving relationship was never based on respect or understanding, but on favoritism and unrealistic expectations. And this, in a way, was liberating. I could finally focus on what truly mattered: my career, my inner peace, and my personal growth. Each day became a chance to strengthen my self-esteem and prove to myself that I deserved recognition, not by comparison with my sister, but for what I was capable of achieving. My career began to take off steadily. The reputation I had quietly built became my greatest asset. Starting my own company was a natural decision. I wanted to create a space where my work would be valued for what it truly was, not for the prestige others sought. Each satisfied client, each successful project boosted my confidence and showed me that the years of struggle had not been in vain. I finally felt like I was living for myself, unshackled by the narrative my family had imposed on me. The feeling of autonomy was intense, almost indescribable, but liberating on every level. Meanwhile, the effects of the scandal began to hit my sister. Alicia saw her reputation irreversibly crumble, her professional license suspended, and her attempts to rebuild her career failed. It was painful to watch, but not out of revenge. On the contrary, I simply felt confirmation of something I already knew, that each person is responsible for their choices and consequences. The difference is that, while she depended on the approval and support of others, I had learned to stand on my own. This realization reinforced my conviction. My victory lay not in humiliating her, but in pursuing my path with dignity and determination. The culmination of this process of overcoming came when my parents, for the first time, came to my door, asking for help supporting my sister. The same Jose and Samantha who had despised me for years now sought my support. For the first time, I felt the need to establish clear boundaries. I demonstrated my achievements, my independence, and my journey, firmly stating that I owed them nothing. I closed the door, both literally and symbolically. In that moment, I realized that true emotional freedom isn't just about winning, but about establishing your own worth without depending on the approval of those who have always underestimated you. Over the next few months, my life began to take on a completely different rhythm. Each morning became an opportunity to reaffirm myself, not only professionally, but also emotionally. I finally felt I could breathe without the constant pressure of being compared or underestimated. My projects were thriving, my company was gaining prominence, and I discovered that the more I focused on my own path, the more opportunities arose. The sense of autonomy gave me strength I never imagined I possessed. Every achievement, no matter how small, was proof that my effort and dedication were valuable, regardless of what my family thought. I was learning that growth and success didn't require external applause. My own approval became enough. It was during this period that I realized that the pain I'd carried for years hadn't been in vain. It had transformed into resilience, discipline, and a quiet strength that allowed me to face any challenge. The loneliness I'd felt during my adolescence and youth now transformed into self-discovery. I could work, create, and make decisions without relying on external validation, and this gave me a sense of freedom I'd never experienced before. Every line of code I wrote, every meeting with clients or partners, was a reminder that my value lay within me, not in the judgment of others. At the same time, I began to notice internal changes that went beyond my professional life. My self-esteem strengthened, my insecurities diminished, and I was able to deal with painful memories in a healthier way. I began to understand that my history of invisibility and contempt did not define my future. With each step I took, I felt my emotional freedom consolidate. I learned that true victory lies not in humiliating or proving something to those who underestimated us, but in building a life of integrity, dignity, and purpose. This understanding brought peace and a sense of fulfillment I had never felt when seeking approval from others. My relationship with my family changed, but unexpectedly. There was no dramatic reconciliation or applause. Instead, there were clear boundaries. I learned to protect my space, my achievements, and my peace. The moment my parents came to me asking for help for my sister was the symbolic moment that represented the entire change. I no longer needed to be held hostage by their approval. My life became increasingly my own, guided by conscious choices and the recognition of my own efforts. Freedom, which had previously seemed impossible, now became concrete and daily. Today, looking back, I realize that my journey of invisibility, contempt, and injustice shaped me. Every challenge, every tear, every night of doubt taught me that overcoming obstacles isn't instantaneous or miraculous, but built with persistence, courage, and self-confidence. My life isn't perfect, but it's mine, built with dignity and strength. I managed to transform pain into motivation, contempt into learning, and invisibility into true recognition, both personal and professional. If anything remains clear to me, it's that a person's worth isn't in the approval of others, but in the ability to fight, resist, and grow, even when all seems lost. Today, I can proudly say, I overcame, not by humiliating anyone, but by finally allowing myself to fully exist.